students and young people, and not so young people, just because I say it does not make it true, does not make it factual, does not make it right. It is up to you to investigate whatever I say. I'm not going to willingly lie to you, but it's up to you to make the final confirmation around what I say. And I come from where many of you come from. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. All right. My mother escaped up south to Detroit. All right. With my sister and I. And my father somewhere in the picture. But this is my mother. Very beautiful, yellow-black woman. That's the title of the book, Yellow Black. First 21 years before his life. But this beauty, when we stand on corners, it will not only stop cars, it will stop buses. And I can never forget going to the largest black church in Detroit, Michigan, sitting in the front row, and the minister couldn't take his eyes off of her. In fact, the guy couldn't get through his sermon. All right? And so when we come out, he's whispering in her ear. And then within 2 weeks, we move into one of his apartments. And so she becomes this outside woman for over a year and a half until he fell off the podium at a National Baptist convention, hit his head and died. Then, of course, his wife put us out. But since he had brought my mother into the sex trade, she and another woman decided that servicing these ministers is a little bit safer than hitting the streets. And so they continued to service these ministers. And I will never forget him telling my mother, don't come back to this church. I got it. I got it. My mother, and I was 14 years old, my mother asked me to go to the Detroit Public Library to check out a book by Richard Wright titled Black Boy. I refused to go because I hated myself. I hated my circumstances, I hated my color, I hated everything that was around me, but she persisted. And by this time, she was over the hill. She had lost much of her beauty, still selling herself. And so I went to the library in Detroit, Michigan, because I did not want to go to that library and ask a white librarian for a book with black in the title, authored by a black man who was critical about white America, because I was ashamed of myself. I hated myself. Went to the library, found the book on the shelf, put it to my chest, and walked to an unpeopled section of the library and sit down and began to read. And for the first time in my life, I was reading literature that was not an insult to my own personhood. I was reading words and sentences and paragraphs about me, about us, that essentially raised my consciousness, and every page I turned in Blackboard was like a slap. Wake up, Negro. 14. And fortunately, I could read. I read Blackboard in less than 24 hours, gave it to my mother, and went back to the library the next day and checked out everything that Richard Wright had published. I was on my way. Why? Because ideas, and the creators of ideas, and the carriers of ideas, they run the world. Everybody else, we tap dance to their ideas. And so my question is, where are the black ideas? And so Richard Wright opened me up to these black ideas. Another question. Another question. My mother's dead at 34. I'm on my own at 16. I wanted to be a musician. I heard Louis Armstrong play. One of the baddest musicians out there. Louis Armstrong, composer, musician. Couldn't nobody touch him on trumpet. Nobody. In the world. I wanted to play me some trumpet. I didn't care for his mannerism too much because I'm angry and so forth. Then this other guy came on the scene by the name of Miles Davis. Miles Davis was tall, he was black, dark-skinned, always clean, and the women gravitated toward Miles Davis like he was a free shoe store. Come on! Play me some trumpet. All right. Went to the middle school I was going to at that time, and Italian band leader said, "Can I want to play trumpet?" I'm 6 foot, 131 pounds, like a walking skeleton. The guy said, "You don't have enough wind up in you." Welcome to Racism Middle School. On the way home, I passed the Poor Man's Bank. You know the Poor Man's Bank, right? Pawn shop, right? Poor Man's Bank. And in the pawn shop, you had these horns, these trumpets. I walk in there and said, "Well, what's the cheapest trumpet there?" The white guy said, "Look, $33. Now, $33, in the 50s, $33 is like $350 a day. All right? I'm 72 years old, all right? And so the guy said, I said, he looked at my eyes, he said, "Well, look, I had this determination in my eyes. I'm 14 years old. I mean, I was like ready." He said, "What I will do, I will sell you that trumpet for $3 down, $1 a week, and for the $1 a week, I'll teach you how to play the trumpet. Deal." I'm on my way. I'm on my way, all right? I go home, rob my bank, come back, you know what I'm saying? I'm learning to play the trumpet. The guy was a master musician. He knew all the black musicians in Detroit. So this was just the summer of that year. In the fall of that same year, I went back and played the first trumpet in the band. That was first trumpet. Now, these two stories. One more. Why am I saying this? You don't let nobody tell you what you can't do. Nobody. I come from the same community you come from. They always told us, "You can't do this, you can't do that." That's not true. That is not true. I'm 18, my mama dead, I don't know where my father is, all right? My sister had her first child at 14, a second child at 16. By the time she was 26, she had 6 children with 5 different fathers. Her life is over with, all right? I don't have nobody to turn to. My mama's dead, and my in-laws, they're not even there, my relatives, extended family. I end up, I graduate from high school, can't get a job. In the Chicago Defender, there was this ad that said, travel and earn a living. Well, yeah, you know what it was? 2 cars traveling across Illinois, stopping in small towns, selling subscriptions to Jet and Ebony and Life and Post and so forth. That's how you're going to see the world, right? So all I had was just 2 suitcases, one suitcase for my books and what little clothes I had my trumpet, on my way. Get into Springfield, Illinois, and knock on this door, get into my stuff, getting ready. I only had one suit I had for my mother's funeral, so I had that suit on a little time. Knock on the door. This distinguished black man answered the door. And I go into my spiel. So I'm working my way through Howard University. If you could please help me by getting a subscription to this magazine. He said, "Howard University?" I said, "Yes, sir." "I'm a graduate of Howard University." "Come on in here." I've never been to D.C. I had read Rayford Logan, though. I had read Elaine Locke. I had read Sterling A. Brown, so I wasn't completely stupid, but I had never been to D.C. The guy, got in and looked at me and said, "Are you hungry?" "Well, I'm 6 foot, 131 pounds. I guess I look hungry." Asked his wife to make me a sandwich, and we started talking. Within a minute, he knew I was not in the college or the university at Howard. He said, "Young man, the one thing that nobody can ever take away from you is knowledge. And for poor people or young people like yourself, the one thing that exists, there are 2 things that exist." He said there's historically black colleges and universities, which Howard is, and the community colleges, which are just coming online. This is 1960. Okay? I said, "Yes, sir." His wife bought me the food. He bought some subscriptions. And I got up to excuse myself and to thank him for the subscriptions, for the food, and for the advice. I'm walking toward the door. And he said, "Son," I keep walking. He said, "Son," he's like, I'm walking. He said, "Young man, wait a minute. Nobody ever called me son before." said, wait a minute. He went in his pocket and he pulled out a $20 bill. This is 1960. And he folded a $20 bill in quarters. He said, put this in your pocket and use it for emergencies. And so, see, this is where I come from. And this is why I love you so much. Because we don't love ourselves. We don't love ourselves. That's why nigga is still alive. We don't love ourselves. If you don't love yourself, you lost already. You've lost already. I took the money, went back to the motel. We moved on into St. Louis. I got ill. People I was traveling with left me. And so the $20 I had, I paid the bill, went into St. Louis, went to the poor man's bank, pawned my trumpet, pawned the clothes I had, and did what many young men and women do today who do not have work, which is the poor boys or poor man's answer to unemployment. I joined the Army, which I would not recommend for anybody. If you got to do what you got to do. By time of war, you don't want to be in this bad boy, because these bad boys are making wars all over, sending us to fight them, all right? Finally got to the basic training. 1960, 3 brothers, the rest white boys, going to basic training in Fort Littlewood, Missouri. I get off the bus. I'm reading a book by Paul Robeson. You know who he is?
Yes.
Here I stand. Paul Robeson's big black man with his face on the cover. I had the book in my hand. The white drill sergeant saw the book. He snatched it out of my hand and said, "What's your Negro mind doing reading that black communist?" First time I heard a double negative used so creatively. The guy said, "All you women up against the bus." This is 1960. There's no women out there. All right? But they break you down with the sexism. All right? And so I'm standing there. The guy holds my book over his head, and he commenced to tear the pages out of the book. The guy is destroying my book in front of me. Now what am I going to do? Can't go AWOL. I have no place to go. But I made several decisions there that have lasted me all of my life. And the first decision is that I'm a man, I'm an African man, I'm a black man of African ancestry. And then my history did not start in slavery. It did not start. All right, it did start. And so part of my responsibility is to make sure I understood the history, the heritage, the bonding traditions of people of African ancestry, us. The second decision I made, I'm not going to work for these guys. I am not going to work for somebody like that. But in order for me not to work for somebody like this guy, I got to know more than he does. And so I vowed then that I'm not going to work for somebody less intelligent than I am. But in order to do that, I got to study. I got to study. I got to read. I got to write. Right? And so I used that time in the military to do that. But also something else, I realized, again, the importance of ideas. That ideas and the carriers of ideas run the world. And so what are the black ideas? What are the black ideas? And that's what I've been searching for all my life. And so for me to be here among you all in the cradle of black ideas and to be among you all is very important to me. I'm going to leave something with you this afternoon that I hope will help you. It will give you some insight into how to deal with this world. And understand, I'm not running for election. You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to get your vote. I may not ever come back again. But I'm going to leave something with you that may help you in terms of your own maturation. What I call the kind of the secrets of life, these 12 secrets of life. I'm here because about 6 or 7 people. One, L.R. Maliki El-Shabazz, Malcolm X. 2, Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs. They're the founders and co-founders of the DuSable Museum of African American History, which is the first black museum in the nation. A man by the name of Dudley Randall. Dudley Randall founded the first serious black book publishing company in the country, which is Broadside Press out of Detroit, Michigan. A man by the name of Hort W. Fuller. Hort W. Fuller was the managing editor of Negro Digest Black World Magazine, the major periodical of the 60s and 70s. If you want to know about the Black Arts Movement, read Negro Digest, which was renamed Black World Magazine. Barbara Ann Zeisman, one of the premier educators in this country, the first black superintendent of the D.C. school system. And she was so right on, they didn't keep her more than a year. And of course, Gwendolyn Brooks, who was a culture mother to me for over 33 years. The first black to win a Pulitzer Prize in this country. One of the wisest, one of the most giving, one of the most serious people I ever met in my life. And then, of course, my wife, Dr. Carol D. Lee, who has an endowed chair at Northwestern University. And especially for young women. I always use my wife and these other women that I named as examples of what you can and must do. Don't get caught here at Tuskegee with these knuckleheads. There are people in this world who live their entire lives without knowing anything about themselves, culturally or biologically. And many of these people run from any identification with their origins, especially if their origins are outside mainstream America. Most of these people have little accurate knowledge about their bodies and generally depend upon the so-called experts for information about their health. Many of these people have very little knowledge about their culture, who they are. So learning to take hold of one's life is very difficult in a culture that values property over life. And this is the same culture, young people, that developed the concept of planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence was developed by the automobile industry in Detroit. And essentially, they said, well, okay, we will build this car to last 3 years. After 3 years, it's going to fall apart. You got to buy another car. But guess what? Japan came along. Japan almost put these bad boys out of business until they woke up. So they developed the concept of planned obsolescence and throwaway underwear. Most black people in this country, we are wards of the state. And this dependency has rendered many of us totally dependent upon the people who enslaved us. And somehow we think that they care for us. Therefore, it is mandatory that African Americans, black people, develop survival and developmental strategies. We must be able to disconnect from the oppression around us, whether it's political, economic, or of a more personal sense coming from friends, family members, or co-workers. Negative people always will want to involve others in their defeated lives. You understand my point? That even here at Tuskegee, you got to find an extended family or a cultural family here at Tuskegee who's actually doing something which may be unusual to a great number of you, studying. Beware of people trying to make their history, their culture, and their traditions yours. Beware of people trying to put their troubles and fears onto you. The road to a life full of stress surely is paved with one's inability to say no to destructive behavior or activities in the home, on the job, in the streets, or in single bars at happy hour time. Now, I gave you some benefit of what I had to go through in terms of trying to move toward understanding what it means to be a black man in America. So knowing one's capacity to deal with the damaged lives of others, as well as one's own developing life, can be the difference between life and death. You see, many of you are first generation university students, which means that your maturation here, your development here, is not only just for you, but it's for your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your mama, your daddy. You see? And so we got to get away from this stress road, because the road to stress, curing stress, anxiety, and frustration is understanding the source of stress, anxiety, and frustration. And so for me, understanding the origins of language, words, of being able to use words in a way in which are not only loving and combative, but also gives me some insight into our todays and our tomorrows. And so for me, poetry has always been very, very important. You remember, just show you how words work with one another. You remember the former president, George Bush? Yeah. You remember how detrimental he was to the country? How he took us into a war? Right? This is a poem, it's called Thoughts on Bushism. All right? And it's in, 4 parts. 1, ignorant people talking about how ignorant other people are reminds me of Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George W. Bush in between their wars and tax cut to their friends, eagerly initiating serious conversation